Christmas 1920. It was cold when Milo woke the next morning, a little head fogged from having got up in the night. She looked around herself and wondered where she was. The bed was comfortable, at least, but it was cold, cold enough to freeze condensation on the windows, the sun's early light playing off their facets. Milo looked at them, and watched how they moved. Then she looked around, and heard feet outside the door, feet with a purpose, fetching, carrying. It was the morning, and the house staff were up and beginning the day, and it must be later than the time they usually rose, for the sun was getting up. After 8, Milo considered. A knock came to the door, and she suddenly looked up. That was where, in Mrs. Hughes's deputy's room, though one did not exist at Downton. Milo sat up at the second knock, then swung her legs out of bed. She was dressed, at least, or rather, not undressed from the night before where she had slipped on her old clothes, those altered ones once her brother's. "Milo, are you awake?" It was Daisy. "Yes," she told her, and crossed to the door. "I'm up," she added, and opened it. Daisy, with a bowl of hot water and a towel, stepped past her and placed the bowl and towel on the vanity. "You are never going out in those," Daisy said to her. "Not when you've such nice clothes to wear," and she nodded to the wardrobe. "What should I wear?" Milo asked her. "What would be suitable?" "Not boys' clothes," Daisy told her. "Keep 'em for when you're working." "What you had on yesterday." Milo reached to the dress skirt and underskirt hanging up and the blouse. It could do with a wash. Perhaps when she had washed herself, she could launder it. It was one of her favorites, comfortable. It didn't cling to her arms and shoulders. "Give me that," Daisy told her. "I can wash that for you. This blue blouse will go well with your skirt, anyway." "Thank you, Daisy," Milo told her. "You're welcome, Miss Ashby," Daisy replied, mostly out of politeness, but a little part of her testing the young woman's form of address. Milo did not react, and Daisy wondered was what she had heard really true. "When you're dressed, come along to the kitchen and you can have some breakfast." 88,888,888. "Who is that?" Jimmy asked Alfred, as they stood in the doorway to the kitchen. Ivy, who had relieved them of their trays and had taken them over for washing up, crossed to the two footmen and looked at Milo too, at her hair pulled back into a ribbon, curling at her neck. At the fact she had said very little to anyone, but her eyes were on everything. "I have no idea," Alfred said. "Auntie will know. She knows everyone." "Where is she?" Ivy asked. "Up with her ladyship," Alfred replied, and this was met with a roll of the eyes from Ivy, for whom that would be far too long to find out the truth. She turned, and stood at the table. "Who are you?" she asked, folding her arms. Beside her, Daisy turned, and stood beside Milo. "This is Milo," Daisy told her, narrowing her eyes. "Milo!" Ivy exclaimed, disdain in her voice as she peered at the young woman, younger even than she was. "Milo," Milo confirmed, then looked back to the toasted bread Daisy had given her, and the scorch of honey on the side of the plate. Then she looked back. The girl was still staring at her strangely. "Milo," she repeated. "Are you a boy?" Milo looked between Daisy and Ivy. "Shut up, Ivy, Milo's come for her breakfast." Milo looked at the two footmen in the doorway, and then back to the kitchen maid, then looked away. "Not very talkative," Ivy commented, dismissively, and made to turn away. But Daisy was having none of it. "You have heard of me, Lucina Ashby," Daisy told her, glaring at Jimmy and Alfred, too. She reached over to the chopping board, passing Milo some of the cut-up apple pieces. "The me Lucina Ashby who won a university place for her research work at Downton." Milo looked at the apple, resisting the urge to take out the pips now. "The me Lucina Ashby requested to work in the team of the Nobel Prize winner Professor Lord Ernest Rutherford." Daisy was glaring at the three, who were staring at Milo, who had decided to put them to one side. "Not very well mannered," Jimmy said. "Well, this is me Lucina," Daisy said, as it were obvious that Milo was renowned for her work. "She fixed all of Mrs. Patmore's electrical devices when even Mr. Hepworth couldn't." Daisy pointed to the toaster and the whisk and the dough kneader. Milo looked up for a second, and then back to her apple slices. Alfred left Jimmy looking at her, and sat down next to her. "So you are the clever girl?" Milo looked to Alfred. "Yes," Milo agreed. There wasn't much else to say, and the question had no further scope to it. After a few moments of staring at the side of Milo's face, Alfred got up and returned to stand by Jimmy, Ivy staring at her as if she were an exhibit in the zoo. "Blimey, I thought she was going to be a young girl, not like her. Nearly fully grown," he told the other footman. "She's 17 in a few weeks, she's not a girl at all," Daisy chided them. This time Jimmy crossed the floor, deciding to give talking to this strange person a try where Alfred had failed. "Oh right," Jimmy said to her. Milo turned. "And how are you enjoying your breakfast then?" "She doesn't want to talk to you, Jimmy," said Thomas Sparrow, removing his cigarette long enough to smile at Milo. Jimmy Kent pushed back his chair. "Haven't you both got jobs to be getting on with?" He glared at them, and then glared at Ivy. "Haven't you got anything Ivy could be doing, Daisy?" I have," Daisy said, giving Ivy a scornful look. "Those plates, this sink." Ivy sighed at the reminder she was on washing up duty as Thomas Sparrow sat down next to Milo. "Did you sleep well?" When Milo did not reply, Thomas looked back up to the ensemble of three, still staring, who then scattered. "Get out of here, you lot." Ivy scuttled off to collect the dirty crockery while Jimmy and Alfred disappeared back into the hall, but did not go very far. "He thinks he's so special, don't he?" Alfred said to Jimmy. Jimmy risked a look back through into the kitchen. Milo and Thomas were in a low, flowing conversation. He nudged Alfred, who chanced to peek. "She'll talk to him and not us," Jimmy said. "Perhaps she knows him," Alfred said, before falling silent when he noticed Mr. Carson in the corridor, and they both ascended the stairs to the hall where the carpet was in need of being taken up. Milo, meanwhile, had decided to go to visit Mr. Hepworth and find out what was going on, and Thomas had agreed to go with her. "Tomorrow," he said, "before Christmas Eve, we can take the ledgers back, ask him about some of the transactions, and the entries, and about the stock in your shop. It is up to you what you do about it." "About any of it," Thomas added. And Milo was sure that it was, and what she was going to do. But she didn't count on seeing her home having been treated shoddily and the business neglected. She extracted promises from Hepworth that there would be improvement, all the time Thomas lingering behind Milo to make the point. The house would be tidied, the shop would be opened and an inventory done, and advertising and promotion would take place to increase custom. "But you are not to go on your own, Milo," Thomas insisted, when Milo had enthused to begin, and had relayed his concerns to Bates that night. "Tell me what you thought of him, before I tell you what I did," Thomas proposed, as John Bates was laying out Lord Grantham's suit. "A wastrel, a scoundrel," Bates replied. Thomas nodded, in agreement. "And would you let Milo be on her own with him?" Thomas asked. Bates gave him a look of amazement. "Under no circumstances," he declared. Thomas nodded, in agreement. "It is her business," he said. "And these were my thoughts." Thomas strode to the door of Lord Grantham's dressing room, then turned. "Thank you," he added, before going to find Milo. He found that she was in the housekeeper's sitting room, attempting to explain to Mrs. Hughes about something she had done at the laboratory. "Well, it all sounds most interesting, Milo," Mrs. Hughes told her, then glanced at the doorway when he saw Thomas standing there, a faint smile on his face. Milo got up and said good night to Mrs. Hughes, and they went to the under-housekeeper's room, Thomas closing it behind her. Milo sat on her bed, and Thomas sat too, a little apart from her, smiling at the collection of various equipment, including old parts of the Down beside her. "Consider finding someone to help you, to go with you, when you go back to your shop," Thomas advised, after he had asked after her day. "I might not be around as we have such a lot to do now it is Christmas. See if one of the houseboys or the footman could at least be there." "I will," Milo promised, though she frowned as she thought of Thomas's caution. "Though Mr. Hepworth has always been kind to me." "I will leave it to you," Thomas told her, getting to his feet. "You will do as you will. But please ask me if you need something," he added. After agreeing, Milo watched as Thomas made it to the door. He turned to her, and crossed back, planting a small kiss on her forehead. "Thomas?" Milo asked. "Daisy told me there was to be a servants' ball at New Year." Thomas shook his head. "No," he replied. "She's clearly mistaken. The servants' ball is always in the summer." But it was Thomas who was mistaken, as the excitement for the event began to grow. Thomas went to ask Mr. Carson, who confirmed the news. "What happens at the servants' ball?" Milo asked Daisy, as the young woman showed her how to knead dough, for more was needed for a luncheon being held by Lady Crawley with her daughters and the Dowager. "The servants dance with the family, of course," Daisy told her, bringing her arms higher to show how to aerate the dough. "And that's exciting, is it?" Milo asked. "I suppose so," Daisy giggled. "Why wouldn't you think so?" And Christmas came, with a dinner at the servants' table, and a supper for the family. Milo sat at the end of the table, so as not to interfere with the strict hierarchy, and she thought about the business. She had been there once that week, and had listened to William Hepworth explain to her that there wasn't call for all of her appliances. It felt wrong, for her father had always made money, and now there were even more appliances on offer, so they should be making even more than they had before. Hepworth had shown her the stock, and the books when she had gone with Dan Pickering, one of the farm labourers and who had stood beside Milo while she had asked Hepworth questions which to her seemed straightforward but to him were confounding. She had got nowhere, and was wondering what to do next. Something was wrong, and she didn't know what it was, or what to do when she found out. But Milo pushed it from her mind as Daisy began to clear the table. Milo got up to help, but Mrs. Patmore waved her down. "The maids can do it," she told her. So Milo got up and went back to her room. She had brought work with her, so sat on her bed reading through Soddy's work on isotopes, which she had brought with her, as well as Chadwick's work on electron emission. He had interest in this from Elise Meitner, who Rutherford knew too, and it had been the professor who had encouraged Milo to write a letter to her, asking about the woman's own research into it, and had she thought to consider whether isotopes behaved similarly. It was only when Thomas came to the door to wish her good night that she realized time had slipped away quickly. "I did not get you anything for Christmas," Thomas told her, apologetically. "Nor are you," Milo replied. "What would you have liked if I had?" Instead of stepping away, Thomas stepped inside, and closed the door. "I don't know," he told her, "to go to Switzerland, and learn how crystal watches are made." He told her an evening out in London, enjoying the nightlife. "How would you like Ashby's?" Milo asked him. "Because I have thought, and I do not know what to do with it." She looked away. "I don't know what to do about Mr. Hepworth. He just talks to me as if my father were still here, and that everything is going to be all right." She looked away. "I don't know who would have it, and if I sell it, can I even sell it? I would lose my home." Thomas stopped, enjoying the silence. She was going in a direction which he could only dream about. Since he was tiny, he knew that he wanted to be a clockmaker, like his father. His father, who had trained him, who had shown him everything he knew. His father who had withdrawn everything from him, love, support, even a home when Albert Leon father had been to see Mr. Barrow Sr. to find out just what his son, Thomas, was up to, kissing Albie in the stables. It hadn't been the first time, and Albie had been willing, more than willing, as it went. But they had been discovered and driven apart. No, Thomas thought, taking over the shop like that for clocks and watches would be too much, even if it was Ernest's home. "What would you do with the electrical appliances?" Thomas asked, at length. "The shop. It could become yours," Milo told him. "What do I know about electricity?" Thomas told her, knowing that, since he had encouraged her to consider the honesty of her tenant, he would now have to talk her into keeping it. He didn't think he could bear Ernest's father's business to be sold off like that. "You could sell the appliances. There is a man at Thirsk with a shop like Ashby's who would take the things, I am sure of it." And though he wanted to very badly take up his wife's offer, for a clockmaker's, with the money she had given him from the patent would set him up for life, he shook his head. "Give it another try," Thomas urged. "It is your home. Ernest put such a lot of himself into it. But be firm with him. Wait until I can come with you." He touched her hand, and Milo moved it, and he glanced at her page of untidy writing. "What's this?" "Some work. I'm writing to Elise Meitner, asking her about her work." Chadwick suggested it when I pointed out the link. Thomas nodded. "She is the one who works at a German university?" he asked. Milo nodded. "I am very pleased that you are happy at Manchester," Thomas told her. He got to his feet and strode to the door. "Merry Christmas," he added. "Merry Christmas." Milo looked back to her work, wondering where she was, as the electric light shone on her words. "Milo." Thomas was still at the door, and she turned to look at him. "If I could have brought you something, what would you have wanted?" "I would have wanted this," Milo told him, gesturing to her work. "Just this." 88,888,888. But Thomas was wrong. There was going to be servants' ball. It was happening on New Year's Eve, and had been Lady Crawley's idea. A poor idea, if you ask me, Milo heard Carson complaining to Mrs. Hughes. "The family always see the New Year in together." "And so they have. And Lady Crawley has decided we will join them." So there was to be a ball. Milo smiled. She liked it when other people liked things, even if she didn't. It made things feel just right, even if those things were things Milo disliked. And it would mean she would be refreshed for leaving the next day, for Chadwick had asked her to come back as soon as she could so they could look through particular information he had come by from Rutherford's Canada laboratory team. It was quite by chance that she overheard Tom Branson on the telephone again. Stood in the eaves of the hall, considering her brother's achievement with the electrical lighting. She did not remember him starting the first fitting, and how she wondered whether she could work out where he began, not for any particular purpose, only for self-satisfaction. She would know the circuit routes of every copper cable in Downton then, and Milo liked completeness in things. This time, a much more level, happier voice was on the telephone talking to his brother in Irish. Milo listened to Tom Branson as she looked, feeling happy for him that they were greeting each other for Christmas, and Tom was promising to visit Erin with baby Sibby to Liverpool. "Miss Ashby," Tom said, running into her as she looked around the gallery and considered the lights. "I didn't see you there." "Nor I you," she replied in Irish. Tom Branson just stared at her. "You speak Irish?" he asked her. "I do," she replied in Irish, and he chuckled a little, still smiling. "Well, I never expected that," he added. Milo said nothing for a moment, then looked at him. "My mother was Irish," she confided. "Then you are Irish," Tom Branson declared. "A person whose mother is Irish makes them Irish." Milo considered this. She had never heard it before. "I was born in a place called Enniscorthy," she continued. "So my grandmother tells me." And she made to turn away, so she could consider the gallery, but stopped as Branson asked, "The Jameson family?" "You know the Jameson family?" "Besides the whiskey, yes," he agreed. "Jack Prue at least." Milo smiled as she recalled Jack Prue. She spent a year never being out of the man's sight. He was her grandmother's assistant. The staffing in the Jameson house was not strict like in Downton Abbey, and Jack acted as the butler, the messenger, the gardener, the gamekeeper and the manager at the distillery. With a big-hearted joviality, Jack had showed Milo how whiskey was made, how to load and shoot a rifle, how to use the two mountains of the Arklow Range to find the direction to Dublin. "How do you know Jack Prue?" Milo asked. "In the pub," Tom told her, then glanced to the floor, giving her short glances. "I am sorry I was mean to you before." "Were you?" Milo asked. "I can't really remember." Which was true. Milo tended to discard sad parts of her life, for she remembered so much, because if she kept them in her mind they popped up unexpectedly in her brain, ruining her day. "And even if you did, I probably deserved it." She was trying to be better anyway, she reminded herself. Be more like other people, and do what other people did, even if she didn't like it. "You came out in the rain to find me," Tom told her. "That was very good of you." "How did you know I was there?" "I heard you tell your brother where you were, and from the wire, I could work out which telephone you must be using." "You really are remarkable, Milo," Tom told her, wondering how much she had heard that night. Had she heard he was being sought, not by the authorities but by a lawyer? Had she heard him ask his brother what a lawyer might want with him? Had she heard Erin's reply that it was to do with an inheritance? That there have been murders, and ear and wanted to know if he could rely on Tom's support from the inside. "Well, good night, Miss Ashby," Branson said to her, and left Milo looking around the gallery as she continued her deductions of her brother's circuitry. 88,888,888. "Can I have a word, Mr. Carson? It's Milo." Thomas Barrow followed Downton's butler into his office. Carson rolled his eyes and placed his hands palm down onto his desk, looking intently at his deputy. "What has she done now?" Thomas bristled. He could understand why Carson resented her being around when she was young, but why now? She wasn't doing anything wrong by being here. "Well, she has done the house a huge favor. The lights on the tree were supplied by Ashby's. Her tenant sold them to us and we set them up. It was only Milo's vigilance which meant we were saved a fire, for the lights were only fitted by her, by the man she trusted with her business, a Mr. William Hepworth." Carson raised an eyebrow. "I see." He cleared his throat. "Anything else?" "Yes. May you have a word with James, Mr. Carson? He is worrying Milo somewhat." "Worrying her?" "Talking to her, wanting to know about her and where she lived, what she did at the university. Did she like dancing?" Thomas exhaled. "I would speak to him, but, given the situation between us, consider it done, Mr. Barrow," Carson said. He leaned towards Thomas. "And you give me your word that Miss Ashby has not been, how can we say, leading him on?" Thomas's face hardened with anger. Carson must have picked up on it and he admitted, "No, I don't suppose she would have. James likes to be liked by the girls, and it may have passed you by, Mr. Barrow, that Milo is no longer a child." "It has not," Thomas told Carson. "Which is what I am doing this all for, to keep her safe, Mr. Carson, but I cannot do it all alone." Carson dipped his head to one side, not admitting the concession. But Thomas knew what it meant, that his point had been made. "Understood, Mr. Barrow. I will speak to James and explain to him that she is to be left alone." He cleared his throat again. "And the lights? They are no longer a fire hazard?" "Milo has ensured they are not." "She is very capable, Mr. Carson." "That I have no quarrel with," Carson said. "It was a fine thing you did for her, if you want my opinion. Just you make sure she is cared for, Mr. Barrow," he added, "for I do not know where she could sleep if the under-housekeeper's room becomes unsuitable." "Always the house, Mr. Carson," Thomas thought as he closed the door behind him. But then, it was for him too. And he went to find Milo to ask her whether she wished to go to the servants' ball. 88,888,888. "Can I ask, are you and Mr. Barrow married?" It was 3 days before the end of the year and the kitchen was deserted. Daisy had placed the mixer in front of Milo, and she had opened it, working out where the fault was. "Yes," Milo admitted, teasing apart two wires which must have got hot and had fused together. "You what?" asked Daisy. Milo looked at her. "No one is to say anything, so he can keep his job," she explained carefully. But Daisy was still staring at her, open-mouthed. "But I used to like him, but he don't like women." She looked shocked, and had frozen, her mouth open. "I mean," Daisy saw the expression on Milo's face, and wrongly interpreted it. "Oh, I did not mean dash." "No, you did mean it." "It's true," Milo said, looking at her. "Thomas does not like me in that way, but in many other ways he does." Daisy continued to stare at her. "How can you be married to Mr. Barrow?" Daisy asked, frowning. "Sometimes, he can be nasty and horrible." "Yes," Milo agreed, putting back the plate at the back of the mixer. She smiled. "All done." 88,888,888. But she had to try to sort out her father's friend at her home before she left to go back to Manchester. Milo had written to Chadwick to tell him she would be back on 1st January afternoon train. So she had to sort out Mr. Hepworth. "I saw you walking, and I thought I'd check you were all right," Tom Branson said, when he stopped her in Downton village, near the church. He had placed a hand on her shoulder and made Milo jump, for she hadn't seen him. She hadn't seen anyone. Milo's mind was fixed on what she was going to do, or what she was going to say when she got to her former home. "I am." "But you don't look it." Milo looked nervously along the lane, words she could use to make Tom Branson leave. shooting from her mind. She began to walk. Branson followed her. "Anything I can do to help," he assured her, then noticed Milo was heading towards a small, walled garden which belonged to a shop and a house. Branson looked at the Ashby's sign swinging on its fixing, before following her. But Milo stopped as soon as she got halfway inside the shop. Branson could just see two men, one about to hand over a large pile of white notes. In boxes were Milo's Miss Me Lucina. He called, when saw Milo's face, for she turned, and hurried off from her home. Witness now that the man she trusted to look after it all for her had been stealing from her. And now, that meant Thomas was right, and she would have to stay at the shop and not return to Manchester. "Milo!" Thomas shouted, glancing back through the door where the two men engaged in nefarious deeds, then back towards her. But Milo was running, out of the back gate of the church and into the fields back towards Downton Abbey.